Hello everybody, welcome to our Facebook Live for the date
The
is the
13th.
13th of October. Great to have you here, those who are able to watch live, and for those who come on later on YouTube or via our Facebook a bit later on. So tonight's program is Michael telling his story, because it's wonderful to hear a person's story. It's how we hand on to the next generation, and it was very well received when Mike gave it at, as I said in the newsletter, the men's group at the church. And so I said to him, when he was saying, well, what should we do this week? I said, well, what about telling your story? Because there's some interesting old photographs, and I don't know if you like me.
Some really old ones.
Some really old photos. So I think you're going to really enjoy watching and listening to Mike's story tonight. So I'm going to hand over to him now.
Well, I hope you do enjoy tonight. Tonight is totally different to anything that we've ever done before. And my apologies to those of you who have come on thinking that we're going to be talking about the Oska Pulse and the technicalities behind that. No, not going to do that tonight. It's going to be totally different. We'll do that another night. We've done lots of those, so we thought, well, we'd just do something. Well, Shirley talked me into this because of the results we got the other day. So anyway, when I first did this presentation, I agonised over how I could squeeze 79.5 years into a 30-minute presentation. It was almost impossible, but I've done it. I could spend all of that time on just telling you about the funny things that happened to me in my early days as a TV tech, especially in the black and white days. I've got so many funny stories, and I've got a couple that I'm going to tell you tonight, maybe three. No, I think it's only two. But the topic tonight is actually the pursuit of excellence. So in the next 20 to 30 minutes, I'm really going to tell you what that means to me, and how many times have you looked back on your life and you've wondered what you would be doing now if you'd have taken a different track, if you'd done different things to what you've been doing in the what you did in the past. You know, like revolving doors. There was a movie called Revolving Doors, and it showed the life of this girl if she had turned left instead of right. I think that's what it was. So if you'd have taken another path to what you did, what would you be doing now? I'm convinced, I've had several major experiences in my life, that I'm convinced a bigger power than me had an influence on those decisions that I've made, and ultimately the paths that I've chosen. So the topic, the pursuit of excellence. Excellence means greatness, the very best. Achieving excellence it's never easy to do, and it's a quality that people really appreciate because it's so hard to find. I will always remember my dad telling me, if it's worth doing at all, it's worth doing well. And it came from my grandparents as well. They told me the same thing. So let's start at the beginning. I was actually born in Northampton in England on the 2nd of February 1942. Fortunately, into a loving Christian family. My great-grandfather laid the first brick in the foundations of the Kingsley Park Methodist Church, which was to become a great influence on my parents. They were both in the Boys Brigade and Girls Brigade, and attached to that church, Kingsley Park Methodist Church. And it was through those organisations that they both met. Now, at the time I was born, my dad was an aircraft engineer in the RAF. Singapore had fallen to the Japanese, and Hitler was doing his best to demolish the industrial cities and ports around England. And shortly after my arrival, Dad was posted to India. And we didn't see each other until his return in 1946. Now, I think this photo was taken just before he left for India. And from the photos that he took and sent back, I think he got the safest deal. Now, I don't know if you're old enough to remember the series on TV, It Ain't Half Hot Mum. Now, Dad was a brilliant pianist. And so when he was off, as you may have heard earlier on, so when he was off duty, he would play the piano in the mess or at any of the concert parties that they ran in order to keep sane. He reckons he never had to buy a drink because somebody always topped up the glass that was sitting on top of the piano. One of my earliest memories was when I was actually 2 years old, and we were living with my nana and my grandparents, and for me I felt very protected and very safe. The Germans, that's my grandparents there, my nana in the middle, I must have been about 4 years old there, and in that particular photo are my great grandparents behind them. But when I was two, the Germans had developed the V1 flying bomb. It was nicknamed a doodlebug or a buzz bomb, and it was powered by a jet engine, and there was just enough fuel to get it over the English Channel and somewhere over London, and when the fuel ran out, the bomb would just drop. And while it only had a range of about 85 miles, the bomb would sometimes fly further and drop onto towns and villages short of just north of the city. Northampton is about 50 miles north of the city, that's London, and two of those doodlebugs actually flew that far and dropped on the town. And I remember at this time that I'd actually been thrown under what's called a Morrison shelter, and it had iron legs and wire strapped around the sides to provide some means of protection against debris that might fall down. Now, I can remember listening to the throbbing sound of that doodlebug. If I heard one come over now, I'd know what it was. It was just the throbbing sound of that motor, and we heard it cut out. And I remember the panic that was on my grandparents at the time. But fortunately, it dropped quite away from the house into an unoccupied building. So now I want to jump forward to the age of 12. I was in the Boys Brigade. Boys Brigade was a big part of my life, with something on every single day or evening of the week. I was actually in both the school and Boys Brigade swimming and gymnastics teams, as well as the school cycle club, so I had lots going on physically in my life. I didn't really enjoy school much. Many of the school teachers in those days, they weren't trained. It was straight after the war, and men were looking for jobs and teachers were needed. English, science and human physiology were my best subjects at school. I didn't get on with my maths teacher. He and I had an instant dislike to each other. He's one of those teachers who loved to embarrass and ridicule others, and as a consequence I just thought I was no good at maths. On the other hand, my science teacher we called him Brute Man Harvey. He was built like an ape, and he had short legs and long arms, and he was very similar to, I don't know whether you remember Professor Julius Sumner Miller. He was just like him, and it was he that introduced me to the field of bioelectronics during a human physiology lesson. And we connected a battery to the legs of a dissected frog and made it twitch, which was very similar to the experiment by this guy Luigi Galvani back in 1780. So this is a picture of me and my best friend Malcolm. Now here I am, I think I'm about 15 there. It was Malcolm's brother who introduced me to the field of communication engineering. Now he showed me how to turn a speaker in your radio into a microphone, and I was able to connect up the speaker in my parents' lounge room, which I had turned into a microphone, and I connected that to the radio in my bedroom, so I could actually listen to the conversation that was going on in my parents' lounge room. And they didn't know this, and in fact I never told my parents until we were actually here in Australia. Now I'm going to tell you about the first life-changing experience. Now, because of my background and my beliefs, I tend to call it a divine intervention. And it was after dinner one evening. I'm sitting at the table reading a practical wireless magazine while Mum and Dad were in the back room doing the washing up. Somehow I managed to knock over a cup of tea. And looking around for something to mop up the mess, I picked up a magazine that was lying in the corner of the table, and I went to drop it on the mess and realised that it was actually the Methodist Recorder. It was a magazine which came from the church, and my family had probably not read it, so I thought, no, I better not do that. And I called out to Mum to get something to mop up the mess. Now Mum comes over with a dishcloth and looks at the paper which I had hurriedly pushed over to the corner of the table, and I'd actually flicked over the page, leaving it partially open. And she noticed an advert which was highlighted in the bottom corner of the page, which when you read it properly after cleaning it, or when she read it properly after cleaning up the mess, it was advertising for an advertisement for a youth worker to come to to work in Perth in Western Australia at the Wesley Methodist Church. Now, my father at this stage of his life, he was the church organist, choir master, officer in the Boys Brigade, and a local preacher. And his full-time position was an engineer working for Plessey Nucleonics. That was a company manufacturing components for the first nuclear power station to be built in England. Now, his real desire was to become an ordained minister in the Methodist Church. At that time in the UK, it would have been almost impossible. So he applied for the position. Now, he received a letter back to say that the position had been taken. However, would he be interested in coming to Australia as a home missioner with a view of becoming a fully ordained minister in the Methodist Church? Well, you can imagine what the expression on my father's face when he read that letter. Now, the amazing thing is, had I not spilled that cup of tea, my mother would never have seen that ad, because I'd almost read the magazine through and missed the advert. Had I not spilt that tea, we most likely would never have come to Australia. So I call that divine incident number one. So we left Tilbury Docks on the River Thames on the 2nd of August 1957. Now here we are, all suited up. Can you imagine going on a liner now, all dressed up like that? We were bound for Fremantle via the Suez Canal, and it didn't take long for us to make more friends on the boat. Now, yeah, if you didn't recognise me, that's me on the extreme right. My dad, amazingly enough, holding a cigarette in his hand on the right. My mother is somewhere in the middle, just above the guy that's kneeling down, and I'd made my first girlfriend. She was standing there next to me. Her name was Christine. And yeah, we had a ball on the boat. We thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. That's a photo of my mother and myself. We're on the sands next to the Mount Lavinia Hotel in Colombo. That is now called Sri Lanka, of course. So, where are we? Donnybrook. Now this photo, I think, was taken must have been about 12 months after us arriving in Donnybrook. That's outside the manse, and I have discovered black football shorts. My dad is wearing his collar, the clerical collar. Mum is looking extremely young there, because she was, I can't remember, how old do you think? 38. So, and we arrived in Donnybrook. Now, Donnybrook did not look like that when we arrived. I think there was one main street, there's one single bitumen road through the street, and it didn't look like that. So, having landed in Donnybrook, it was our first home in Australia, and it's here that I made my mind up to become the person that I wanted to be, not what people expected I would become. I could tell you a little bit more about some of the school teachers back in England, one of them in particular, who shook his head in disgust and said, "I don't know what's ever going to become of you, Hawker." But I made up my mind I would show him what I was going to become. So school in Aussie was totally different to what I had experienced in England. Teachers are helpful. Teachers like Sylvia King and Brian Keating, they actually taught me how to study, how to apply myself, and how to be responsible for my outcomes. I remember my father's advice, once again, if it's worth doing it all, it's worth doing well. Now, it was here that I first fell in love. I have to tell the story because it's a very important part of my history. A new girl came into our class, and she sat immediately behind me. She was blonde and a very lovely girl, and over time we fell madly in love. Well, we thought we did, and we were inseparable. We were a serious item for several years. Now I was 19, left school, and now working in Bunbury when her father decided it was best for Anne to see the world before settling down, and quite rightly too. So Anne called it off, and I was absolutely devastated. I thought my world had come to an end. Of course, as time passed on, I met Shirley, and I fell in love all over again. Now, at the time, Shirley lived in Perth, training as a nurse, and I lived in a boarding house in Bunbury. And I'd asked Shirley to marry me, and we were going to announce our engagement once I had saved enough money to buy that ring. So one evening, the phone rang at the boarding house, and Mrs. Smith, the landlady, called me, and she said, "There's a young lady wants to talk to me on the phone." And I naturally thought that was Shirley. But anyway, I picked up the phone, and it was my old girlfriend. Shock. She was back home. She wanted me to take her to a dance at that weekend. Now, my heart pounded, but why? Did I still have a connection to this girl? So after much deliberation and a second call, I decided we should probably meet and have a coffee and a chat, but not go to the dance. So she agreed, and as Shirley was on night duty that weekend, I wasn't going to be going to Perth anyway. So on Friday after work, I started the drive to Donnybrook, but I didn't make it. A car pulled out in front of me, and I T-boned that car. I ended up in hospital. I never did get a chance to see the girl on that occasion, and I took it laying in hospital, looking at the ceiling, no mobile phones in those days. In reflection, it certainly was a divine course of action. So that was the second thing that made a big change in my life. So I made up my mind that Shirley was going to be the one for me. So going back to the 16th of October, and I was going back a bit in time, 1969, the TVW7 launched the first TV transmissions in Perth. Now, by that time, I was a trainee communication technician working in Bunbury. Radio, TV, PA systems and the recording industry was all part of the company that I now work for. Being so far away from the transmitter towers in Perth, it was actually necessary to install very, very tall antennas. Now, this one's about 120 feet high, and they all came in 15-foot sections. That was in order to get a reasonable reception on your black and white TV, and the company that I worked for, they specialised in perfection. Only the best will do. So we installed these very high TV masts, sometimes linking groups of homes together on one antenna, and this meant masthead amplifiers and lots of special gear. And I want to tell you about another occasion when I'm sure once again divine intervention actually saved my life. It was a freak thunderstorm, and it burnt out the masthead amplifier right at the top on one of our towers. It was 115 feet high with another 15-foot section out of the top of that. It was my job to replace that burnt out amplifier. So now this picture here shows the lattice structure of the tower. That's not me at the top of this. I used to have a photograph of me at the top, but I've lost it. So you can see the lattice structure of the tower built into the side, or the ladder built into one side. It's guided every 15-foot section, and once at the top I decided not to do up my safety belt, as it would have been in the way of some of the elements of the antenna. Now this picture shows one a phased array, but we have two of these phased arrays mounted side by side on a crossbar, so it would have been very difficult to stand in there with the safety belt done up. So with one leg wrapped around the tower and all my weight of my body on one leg, I removed the old amp, lowered it down to the boss who attached the replacement. I pulled up the replacement amp, the size of a house brick and weighing about nearly a kilo, and I replaced that. And once it was locked into place, I breathed a sigh of relief, climbed down a clearer space, and leant back into my safety belt. But of course it wasn't done up, was it? Now, fortunately, I had a lanyard around my neck with on the end of that lanyard was a 12-inch crescent wrench. And somehow, I got no idea how, because all these rungs they're on top of each other. There's no way that crescent wrench should have gone down between two of those rungs, but it did. And the fact that it had gone down there, when I went to lean back into my safety belt, it was the lanyard around my neck that actually saved me. So that was one of a number of near fatal accidents that prompted me to tell my boss, hey, I'm a technician, I'm not a rigger, that's the last tower I climb. So that was it. I never climbed another tower after that. In 1964, on 21st of November, Shirley and I were married. Now, my dad had just become an ordained Methodist minister, and we were the first couple he married after his ordination. So that was really a very special occasion for my dad. Well, for us as well, of course. Okay, so now I'm going to jump again, and we're going to 1968, actually, with two children, and we're now living in Bridgetown. One child. Thank you, Shirley. And expecting another. So we're now living in Bridgetown. Now, Bridgetown was it still is a lovely country town. Now, I was the service manager for Bunbury TV service, covering Bridgetown, Boyatbrook, Mayonup to the north, Kirrip to the west, and Nannup down to the south. I really did love travelling the countryside in the southwest, and country people are so friendly. But it was hard on Shirley, and I was away from home all day, and we only had one panel van, and poor Shirley had to walk everywhere. Really sorry about that, Shirley. She's forgiven me now, but it wasn't a very pleasant time for Shirley. Although we did love the community, it was really good.
It was a lovely town.
Yeah, it was. So now here are some of the funny stories. As I said, I've got dozens of funny stories to tell, but these are probably two of the funniest, and also divine incident number 4. So one of the houses in Bridgetown was like that. Many of the houses were like this in Bridgetown. And what happened was, I had this lady ring up, and she said she had a healing TV, and the sound had gone, no sound. And she lived at number 5 Rose Street. So this is number 5 Rose Street. So I get there, knock on the door, and there's nobody home. And in those days they said, look, if nobody's home, go in. She had told me that. So I hopped in and I looked over to the TV, and of course it wasn't a healing, it was an AWA. But it didn't take too much, it didn't worry me too much, because a lot of people didn't know whether they had a Philips, a TV, an AWA or what. So I turned it on, and the sound was okay. So I thought, it could be intermittent. So I took the back off, and in those days we used to tap the back of it, the valves, to see if they were okay. Because if you tapped it with the back end of a screwdriver, sometimes they would arc and spark, and that was an indication that there was something wrong. So the audio output valve was, I remember, it was a 6AQ5, and I just tapped it, and it did flash and make a funny noise, and I thought, that must be the problem. So I replaced it, put a new valve in, and I put that old tube, as they call them, well, I call them tubes in America. I put the valve in the old box and put it on top of the TV set. As we always left the parts that we replaced, we always left them with the customer. It was under contract, so I wasn't worried too much about being paid. And I also noticed that the picture, the people in it, the flower pot men were a bit, they were elongated. They were much longer, and the phases of the people were elongated. So I thought, that doesn't look right. So I had a test pattern generator and noticed that the circle on there was really oval, not round. So I fixed all that up. I left the TV, Got back to the office. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rings, and it was a lady saying, when are you coming to look at my TV? I thought you were coming early. And I said, oh, well, I did. There was nobody home. I went in. She said, well, it's still not working. Still no sound. Okay. So I went back to... wrong one. I went back to the house, knocked on the door, and a lady comes to the door, and I said, hello, I've come to have a look at your TV. He said, nothing wrong with my TV, it's okay. And I said, is this number 5 Rose Street? And she said, this is 5 Row Street. I bet you want 5 Rose Street, R-O-S-E. I thought, no. I could see over her shoulder the TV that I had fixed and the old valve sitting in its box on top of the TV. I didn't say anything. So I just left her and said, thank you very much, hopped around to Rose Street, and yes, it was a healing TV, and I fixed that and went back to the office at the workshop. It was about a couple of weeks later, I think it was, I got a phone call from the lady in Rose Street, and she said, funny thing has happened. She said, I wonder if you could come and have a look at my TV. She said, the newsreader has got a fat face. He used to have a long face, got a fat face. And the flower pot men, they've gone all squat and fat. So I went round there, and guess what I did? I made that circle oval. That sorted her problem.
And did you remove the valve from the top? Was that still there?
The old valve was still on the top, so I confiscated it. So I never did tell her. Having time over again, I would actually tell her, but I don't know. I don't know why.
Well, you were only 26.
I was 26
or 27. Yeah.
Now, another funny story. I got to tell you this one, and I might have to get out of my chair to demonstrate this one. So anyway, once again, country town. They always said, look, if there's nobody home, go in. I had a phone call from a lady on a farm down in Balingup, and she said they had a Motorola, and there was no picture. Sound was okay, no picture. So I drove down to Balingup, and when I got there, yes, certainly they had a Pope Motorola, and as you can see, it's a box on legs. Now, to get to the chassis, the guts of it, you had to pull the whole picture tube out from the front, and it's held in place by 4 bolts bolting in the chassis underneath. And so I actually removed that, and I fixed up the you actually pull it out from the front, and I propped the picture tube and everything on a chair, kitchen chair that happened to be handy. Found the fault with a little video diode that I replaced, and of course now to get it back, if you can imagine, you can't push it because it's on legs. You can't push the chassis back in. You've actually got to get behind it and pull it in. So I'm standing behind the chassis, pulling the whole thing in this way. And whilst I was there, I thought, oh, well, I'll do the bolts up underneath, which I did. And then I heard the car coming up the driveway, and I thought, oh, that's good. They're coming home. And last bolt, tightened it up, went to stand up. And I couldn't move because in those days we wore a tie, and the tie had gone down between the picture tube and the frame. And there was not enough left to me to get it undone and put it over my head. So what I had to do was I got a razor blade from the top of my toolbox and cut the tie off and took that off and threw it into my toolbox, opened up the neck of my shirt, and just in time for the people to come home and saw that their TV was working again. Now the funny thing is, years later, I'm in Perth at a Television Technicians Institute meeting, and there was a group of guys, and we're all telling funny stories. Now I'm now here, where was I? In Albany. I was in Albany in those days, and the gentleman that had taken over my position in Bridgetown was telling the story about the funny thing that happened. He got called out to this farm in Balingup, and whilst the customer had been watching TV, all of a sudden there's a little puff of smoke came out, a bit of a flash and puff of smoke. So very quickly they turned the TV off, And he said when he got there and undid the chassis, he found a tie had somehow dropped down from the top. Now, there's a horizontal output tube in there that generated about 16,000 volts, and you can actually draw an arc off the top with your screwdriver about 2 inches long. So in my tie, there had been a metal lurex thread, and gradually as the tie had rotted, it had got further and further and close to the top, and eventually it drew an arc off the top, which was the flash and a bit of smoke, and then it fell down, and that was it. So the guy was saying, how could this happen? How did that tie get in there? And I said, I can tell you exactly how that tie got in there. So that's a number of funny stories, but there's only 2 of them. So, okay. One day I had a lady ring me up and say her TV had gone wrong. Every time that she turned on, it came on for a second and then the screen went black. So this one was a difficult one, and we picked it up, took it into the workshop, and we could not find the fault. It was obviously an what we call a gain control, automatic gain control fault, because every time you brought the TV and the antennas close to the terminals on the back, as soon as it got a picture, it would go dark. So the automatic gain control was a bit like an automatic accelerator in your car. And this one was faulty, and I could not find the fault. We'd had it for about 3 weeks. There was a number of different places. We replaced just about everything in the AGC circuit, but it still didn't fix the problem. So I went to bed one night and I actually prayed about it. I said, Lord, I don't know how to fix this. And the lady's getting upset. We'd loaned her a set, but she wanted her own. And that night I had a dream. Styrocell bypass capacitors, replace them, and I could not believe, there we go, there's the Styrocell capacitors. Now every technician knows these days, if you come across Styrocell capacitors, you got to replace them. Well, at that stage I had not heard about this, but it came to me in a dream. Replace the bypass capacitors. There were 3 of them. So I couldn't wait to get back to the workshop in the morning. And I said to young Pete, the technician there, Pete, I think he was our apprentice, and I said, Pete, snip off just cut them off, the bypass capacitors. The very first one that he clipped off, picture came back. So that was it. Divine incident number 4. So we moved to Albany, and I had taken in 1972. Well, am I right there? It's 1972, Sean?
No. Fiona was born in April 69, and we went to Albany 4 months later. So we went to Albany in about August 1969.
Right. Okay. We had actually moved to Albany, and I'd taken over the branch of Albany TV Services. Now, by 1975, I'd actually purchased the business and now owned Albany TV Services, Albany Rentals, Albany Marine Electronics, Albany Antennas, and Albany Communications. We had 9 on the staff, and yes, we even put in a range of electronic organs. We repaired them, so why don't we sell them? I'd also become an avid scuba diver, and we even began a dive school. I've got some pretty scary stories here as well, but I don't have time to tell you about that. There's some that was down at Emu Point, and we were just checking a guy's gear before we took off into the middle there. We enjoyed 10 years of providing service to the community, and it was here in Albany that I became involved in the medical industry. Now, one of the doctors, Dr. Joe Lubick, came to me one day with a heart monitoring device. He'd actually taken it home to become familiar with it and its operation, and he slipped on wet concrete and dropped it when he was putting it back on the car. And I said, Joe, I've got no idea how this worked, but he insisted I take a look at it, because if I didn't and couldn't fix it, he was going to be in trouble. So as it happened, it was an easy fix. But ever after that, any instruments that broke down, there was a medical instrument, electronic, or either battery operated or plugged it into the mains, they would bring it to me to get fixed. If it was out of warranty. And in order to fix it, I actually had to know how they worked and what they were supposed to do. So that was another learning curve for me. We actually took our first proper holiday in 1976, and my first trip back to the UK was then, and there had been many changes in the way that we did business as well. When we got back, I became very dissatisfied and almost depressed, and I needed a change. So the whole box and dice changed when I sold the business to my foreman and ended up opening a music shop called the Family Music Centre. We've got some funny stories there as well, but haven't got time to tell you about those. But our son Paul, our eldest son, he'd become very interested in joining the police force, and it looked like we'd need to relocate to Perth. So I think it was, am I right in saying it was 1980?
Yes.
Hey, you got that one right.
31st of March 1980.
Oh, there we are. 31st of March 1980 we moved to Perth. I'd accepted a position as State Service Manager for Steadfast Enterprises. It was a Christian organisation, but the sales manager was so difficult to work with. And so when I found Yamaha Music Australia was looking for a state manager, my background in the electronics industry as well as keyboard, I applied for the job and I got it. So for the next 10 years was a great experience working with some extremely professional groups of people. I was very fortunate to be able to travel to Hong Kong and Japan, and I met some very famous musicians, including John Farnham. Now, I think you can see John Farnham right in the middle there. I'm on his left, and the motley crew surrounding him were some of the other managers of Yamaha throughout the States. There's the young John Farnham on the right, and I even worked with his sound crew during the release of the album Whispering Jack at the Jupiter's Casino on the Gold Coast, and it was a very interesting time that we had there. So all good things have to come to an end. Nothing stays the same forever. In 1994, Shirley had been invited to join Emma Page Jewellery as the sales manager for New Zealand, and I was also asked to join, but as the operations manager. So in when was it? 1993.
Yes.
I got that one right too. So 1993, we left the kids instead of the kids leaving us. It was supposed to be a 5-year contract.
They were adult kids, though.
Oh, they were adult kids, yeah. But the owner was a very crafty Jew who loved to change the rules after the goal had been kicked. So we decided at the end of 12 months that we would come back to Australia. We did, however, make lots and lots of friends, and they're still good friends of ours. And we did see a lot of New Zealand. We've been back there once and met all those friends that we made. It was a fantastic time. Now, I think it was sometime in 2002 that I fell off a roof. And apart from a few broken ribs, I broke all the little bones in my wrist. And my surgeon told me it was important to exercise my wrist. But you can see that it was in this photograph that it was pinned, and how was I going to do that? I couldn't move it. So the surgeon said, when the pins come out, you must exercise your wrist. And I said, isn't that going to break what you've done in there? So he explained that exercise, the compression and decompression of the proteoglycan matrix, which I know that's what it was. I can't remember whether he actually told me that then, but he said it's the exercise that creates an electrochemical potential across the cell membrane, which allows the exchange of important ions such as sodium, potassium and calcium to help to speed the recovery process. And he said if I didn't exercise it, then I was a potential for all sorts of problems in my wrist.
Especially osteoarthritis. So I puzzled over that, but I didn't forget all that he had explained to me. So
I think it was about 2 years later I was introduced to pulsed electromagnetic field therapy through a friend, David Adams, and I remember what the surgeon had told me. So I began studies again, but this time in the bioelectronics field. Now fortunately, our granddaughter, Jade, was studying at Murdoch University, and she began to provide me with all of her course lecture material, specifically targeted at cellular regeneration. I loved it. I watched all the videos of class lectures, even doing the exams that Jade marked for me and putting me right where I made some mistakes. So when we opened the business Medic Technology in order to market the latest pulsed electromagnetic field device designed here in Perth, my experience in the electronics field told me that although the bio side of the product was on the right track, the electronics side could be vastly improved. So in pursuit of excellence, I was already designing a vastly improved product that eventually became the Oska Pulse and now being sold worldwide. We unfortunately we lost our dear son Tim to brain cancer, and this picture here I'm not that happens to be a water pistol I'm fixing there, not an electronic device. Tim had just turned 40 and had a lovely wife and 2 gorgeous children. That didn't seem fair. It still doesn't seem right that any of our children should die before us. Tim, along with our children, Paul, Fiona, they tackle everything with the same attitude in pursuit of excellence. He was sadly lost at his where he worked at Orbital Engine Company, and he was one of those that could weld aluminium, and it looked like it was done with a finger, not a machine. It was excellent. Everything that he did was in pursuit of excellence. It was shortly after Tim had passed away that I was motivated in developing a better PMF device. So as a result, the Oska Pulse is manufactured in South Dakota, USA. We have that's the Oska Pulse. You can, for those of you who are on YouTube and never seen one before, I'm just going to go back to it. It's a handheld device. It can be worn over clothing. That was one of the first factory that we had producing the Oska Pulse. And this photograph is of Dr. Jeff Marksbury, who now heads up the operation in the USA. That's me sitting opposite, and one of the investors in the company with a cap on, and a couple of the staff members there were having a bite to eat. We now have agents in the UK, Germany, Hong Kong, Korea, and of course here in Australia. Have I missed anywhere? I guess Singapore. Oh, Singapore. Yeah, I missed Singapore. Yeah. And so we're gradually spreading the good word throughout the world. So in my conscious years of living, I figure the first 15 years, I'm going to say 64 years of conscious living, because the first 15 years I was still trying to figure out what life was all about. I've learned that we all have challenges: physical, mental, emotional. Relationships with people we live with, we work with, or we're friendly with can sometimes end up being quite complex and sometimes quite stressful. And sometimes we just don't know how to handle the challenges set before us. In my case, which girl do I choose? Fortunately, I chose the right one. How do I fix a technical problem that I've been working on for 2 or 3 weeks? How do I determine the best technology and what I've learned, and how do I apply that for use in the pursuit of excellence in the Oska Pulse? And only a few weeks ago, how to deal with a complex biotech issue in a project, next project design. Now, I don't know what your beliefs are. You may or may not believe in a God at all. But for me, I have no other answers for why I'm still here today, doing what I'm doing. I have to say that, the most often the answers to my prayers come in the form of a dream or an instant awakening to an answer. And I'm sure, somebody had their hand on me when I didn't do up my safety belt, and that spanner went down between those two rungs. How did that happen? If you try to do it today, it would not happen. You can't make it do that, but it did. So my challenge to you this evening is, no matter what your beliefs, no matter what your age, the pursuit of excellence, or in all you do, your work, your relationships with others, in particular your family, has enormous benefits to you and those associated with you. So finally, this is taken from a book, In Pursuit of Excellence, written by Terry Orlick. And my apologies to Terry Orlick because I've spelt his name incorrectly there. I think it's Orlich. Virtually everything you do or not do in life is ruled by the choices you make and act on, or fail to act on, every day. You choose to excel or choose not to excel. You choose to bring a positive and fully connected focus into what you do, or you choose not to. You can choose to be negative or stressed out about things beyond your control, or you can choose not to. You can choose to let other people's comments, actions, or inactions upset you, or you can choose not to. You can choose to approach obstacles or challenges in positive ways or in negative ways. You can choose to dwell on the negatives which drag you down, or focus on the positives which can lift your spirits and give you positive energy. You can choose to embrace your dreams and pursue them with full focus, or you can let them drift away without really trying. These are your choices. I think I missed that, didn't I? These are your choices, that direct the quality and consistency of your performance and the joyfulness of your life. You decide for better or for worse. So I hope you've enjoyed that. It was part of the presentation that I did a few weeks ago, and Shirley thought that it would be a good idea for me to do it tonight. So now you know where I've come from. You know how old I am for a start, but where I've come from and how I managed to get involved in the development of the Oska Pulse, and why we are so committed to the pursuit of excellence.
I also wanted Michael to tell the story so I would hear it, because I hadn't heard it either. I read the script, but I hadn't actually heard his story, because you don't write everything that you're going to say in the script. So it was great to hear that story. I hope you enjoyed it. Oska Pulse is our passion, because we feel we were directed to develop this, or Michael in particular was to develop this, and we just get so many calls and emails and text messages and saying, wow, I had 2 ladies in 1 week say I feel 10 years younger since I've been using it, and quite quickly, so I thought that was a good one. We are also dedicated to the pursuit of excellence in looking after our customers, and so anybody who buys one, they can always ring us up and ask us questions or email us, and we'll always get back to them. So, and with our family, we love our family dearly, and we're fortunate to have beautiful grandchildren, 8 of them, and 7, nearly 8 great-grandchildren. So we're very blessed, and we have friends and family all around the world. One of his is watching now from England, Rachel, and friends in Israel and America, and yeah, we just feel we're very blessed.
We sure
at this
are.
Stage, yeah.
Well, we're gone 45, we're nearly 50 minutes, so my apologies for going over time. I hope you've enjoyed tonight, and keep in touch. Let us know how you feel about what we did tonight, and if you didn't like it, then tell us.
I'm sure nobody wouldn't like it, they just wouldn't watch.
No, we wouldn't watch. Sure.
Good night, everybody.
It's good night from us, and we'll see you next time. I just got to make sure I turn the sound off here.
Oh, and did you enjoy Michael's dad playing the piano the introduction while we were getting ready to go online tonight was the piano being played by Mike's.
I'm just going to take 2 minutes to tell you about this. That what you heard tonight was a compilation. We've got it on a CD, but I had to compile it from a number of old cassettes, and some of them had virtually disintegrated. So I must have spent a month on it. I actually copied where we had a few bars missing. I actually managed to copy bars from earlier on and drop them in at the right spots. I don't think anybody could tell where I put it in, but that was a work of art. I'm very proud of that. Yeah, that's some of what you heard tonight. If you want a copy of that CD, let me know and I'll get one to you. Okay, that's it from us tonight. Bye for now.